Good evening. My name is David Marskell. I'm the CEO of the museum. And on behalf of everyone at the museum, I want to send a warm welcome. Whether watching in real time or tuning in for a non-core presentation of this evening, thank you for showing your support. My name is David Marskell. I'm the CEO of the museum. And joining us for another installation of the Museum Plus, as we present our final alarm dialogue. As with all of our exhibitions, we use what we call the festival strategy to think about and to attract partners and collaborate with as many in the community as possible. One example is the graphic design of our Bee Buddy, who you can see on my t-shirt here, from our local artist, Ter Chartrand. Some t-shirts are still available at the museum if you're interested. Another early and important collaboration emerged between the museum and 50 by 30 Waterloo Region. They are local, doing terrific and important work, and were quick to contribute to Spectrum, the climate emergency experience, which was one of the 4 exhibitions that made up Alarm. Celebrating their massive climate strike in 2019, which saw more than 5,000 people come together in Waterloo Square, we incorporated actual signs and videos and some amazing photos into Spectrum. But to begin the evening, I'd like to now welcome Laura Hamilton from 50 by 30 to our virtual stage. Laura?
Thanks, David. I'm going to offer something called a living land acknowledgement. This is an opportunity for people to share their experience of giving land acknowledgements in relation to their thinking along the way. So I'll start, there. So it's a bit different than other land acknowledgements. I woke up to the paralyzing climate science in 2013 when I stopped thinking about global warming and began to understand the climate crisis. My focus was on the future that we've created for ourselves. I got active and I began organizing. I wanted everyone to wake up and act to avoid this catastrophic and violent future we would be leaving to the generations that follow us. At that time, I understood land acknowledgements as a respectful way to begin gatherings. I would say that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We acknowledge this as an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory we reside on, and as a way of honoring the Indigenous people who've been living and working on this land from time immemorial. Over time and through new and beautiful relationships with some of the original people of this land, and through deeply thinking about the root causes of the multiple crises we are facing, I began to see such acknowledgements as an opportunity to invite others to think about what we have done and to reflect on the systems and structures that have caused the injustice that surrounds us and that we continue to benefit from at the expense of others. I learned about the treaties and promises that were made and broken, and I realized that we are living on stolen land. And I would say land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context, that colonialism is a current ongoing process and that we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation. And I would say that we are on stolen land. And I would say that the climate crisis is a crisis whose symptoms are ecological, but whose root causes lie in an economy structurally ill-equipped to respect land, labor, and human dignity. And as I spend more time with the knowledge keepers, the Medeawin, the storytellers, and the water walkers, and more time on the land and with the water, understanding my life in relation to all life on Earth and the water that sustains us, I've come to appreciate that climate change isn't a technological problem or an economic problem. It is, at its core, a relationship problem, resulting from a breakdown in our relationships with each other and with the land. This is a crisis that can best be addressed through a relational worldview, a worldview characterized by the concept of the circle, interconnectedness, and connection to place, a worldview based on respect, reciprocity, responsibility, and relationships. Now, I ask people to think about the worldview that got us here and the worldview that we will need to get us out of this mess. And I say that I'd like to begin this gathering with a statement of gratitude and political acknowledgement of the Indigenous caretakers of this land. And now I say that this is the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, who exist in a deep reciprocal relationship, not only with the land and waterways, but also with the physical and spiritual forces that connect them to this space, their place of creation, in an intimate and meaningful way. Now, when I offer a land acknowledgement, I express my gratitude to the land and to all life on earth. And I invite others to learn from, listen humbly to, and take our cues from what the first peoples of these lands are telling us to do whatever work we are doing in solidarity with the original people of this land, and to actively support land back campaigns. Land acknowledgements are an essential and respectful way to begin gatherings, but I have come to understand that they are much more than that. Land acknowledgements are a local, place-based response to multiple global crises and an opportunity to help us to begin to heal our relationships with one another and with all life on earth. Now I'm going to turn things over to Kelly Fantastic Davis to open this evening in a good way. Kelly's a truly beautiful spiritual person, known I'm sure to many of you for her good work educating, writing, and speaking about the wrongs of colonization and the impact it continues to have on generations of the original peoples of this land. Kelly?
Thank you so much, Laura, for that beautiful introduction and for your amazing land acknowledgement. I am so honored to be here, and I'm going to start out with a small prayer in my languages, in Cayuga and Mohawk languages, which are 2 of our 6 languages as Haudenosaunee people. So before I do that, I'll just say that I am Haudenosaunee from the local territory of the Grand River. And my Ongwe Homeway, or original name, is Heyo Tandok. It means rites of passage. It is the field before the forest, the edge of the field before the forest. So Nyawa Goa, Sangwa Indiso, Sangwa Wiganyohanyo, Ne Deata Nuarado, Ne Ongwe Soa, Eto no Yaduhage, Ne Ngwat Negura. So in those words that I've shared, I've talked about, the first part was given thanks that we have things to be thankful for, in relation to our natural environment and our human race. So then I went on to acknowledge and give appreciation and thankfulness that we have people in our lives, people that impart very great things in our lives, as well as people that present or provide challenges in our lives. And the reason why I acknowledge those people as well is because I was taught those that challenge our lives in uncomfortable ways are our greatest teachers sometimes. So I just wanted to acknowledge all people in that way, because that is our first race. That is our first family, is the human race. So I was taught that we always acknowledge the people first. And in a much larger, longer acknowledgement about our spiritual connection to our natural environment, our speakers will go on and talk about everything on the ground, below the ground, and above the ground, and including those unseen things that we find in our teachings that talk about, creator and spirit guides and heaven dwellers. Some may call them angels. But anyways, yeah, so anyways, we do this prayer, and it's called the Ganyohanyo in my language, and it loosely translate to the words that come before all else. And I appreciate be given these opportunities to open such important events as this one is tonight, to talk about climate and to talk about our responsibilities, like Laura had mentioned, about our responsibilities to our future generations. So I'm taught that we're not to just take everything and, profit and whatever else from our natural environment, because we have to leave a thriving natural environment for our future generations to also live and thrive and grow from. So before I go on, I wanted to share, and last year when I did the opening for this event, I shared some treaties, which Laura talked about. And these treaties, yes, she's right, they're not honored, they're not respected, and they're certainly not continuing on from, you know, our mainstream or governance of Canada currently. But I do want to share just a couple of the treaty belts, replicas of the treaty belts of the Haudenosaunee people. And I'm going to start with this one because this one is called the dish with one spoon. And this dish with one spoon represents our natural environment and all of those resources that, you know, sustain our well-being. And so in that, what we're taught in this treaty, now this was long before any settler and indigenous agreements. So this was amongst the nations that of the original people of this land. So this belt was created to say that we have to be mindful of each other. We have to know that there's other beings other than the human beings that also share those resources, and that we have to be mindful that we do not take away their livelihood as well. So we're to keep this dish clean when we're done with it, and we're also to be mindful not to take more than what we need in order for us to have a well-being and to have good health, and be mindful of the other beings as well. So I'm going to quickly kind of go through these treaties. And when Laura talked about the Haudenosaunee people, that's my people, and we have territories all over Canada and all over the United States. And but I'm going to share with you our Confederacy belt, and that's this one. So this belt represents the original 5 nations, which were the Seneca, Cayuga, Oneida, Onondaga, and Mohawk. And later on in the 17th century, we adopted the Tuscarora, and that's how we became the 6 nations. But that is our Haudenosaunee governance, our traditional Haudenosaunee governance. And then I want to share with you this wampum belt, which a lot of people may be familiar with. Sorry about my dog. This is called the Truro Wampum Belt. And now this is the first wampum belt that was created with settlers, and it was created with the Dutch in the 16th century, in the early part. And what it represents is to say that we have differences as nations, but we can coexist together in peace and harmony and love, as long as we respect each other's differences and, you know, draw on our similarities, because that's what we need to do in order to coexist. Is we need to say, okay, we may practice our traditions and our teachings and our faith differently, but you know what, we're still of the same family, the human race. And I just wanted to say, I am so honored again to be here, to do this opening, to be able to share some of my thoughts on climate change and this particular event. And I just, I know it's hosted out of Kitchener Waterloo, the museum, and a lot of partners within that region. And I just wanted to share that there is a huge land reclamation happening. There is, like Laura talked about, land back. There's 1492 land back lane that's happening right now at 6 Nations, an hour west of the Kitchener Waterloo area. And that's my home community, 6 Nations, like I said, and it's the Haudenosaunee land defenders that are saying we have to stop development, we have to stop raping the earth, because we have to think of our future generations. So currently we have people and supporters there stopping a huge housing development that's, you know, I don't want to get into all the history of it, but I encourage everybody to, you know, look it up. It's gained national attention, and it's called 1492 Land Back Lane. And it is, again, there's a lot to do with the treaties and the relationships that we were promised to have with the settlers that came to this land. And as stewards, Haudenosaunee people, as stewards of this land, it's our responsibility. We're not looking to, hurt anybody's way of life or, or to stop people's livelihood, but we are thinking about our future generations. So with that, I'd like to say welcome to the event this evening, and thank you again to the museum and to all the partners that had asked me to participate in this evening's event. So now I'll go, thank you very much.
That was wonderful. Thank you very, very much, Laura and Fran Kelly. It's wonderful to see you again. Just before I get going again, I understand that I stood up a little quickly, and I wanted to show you Ter Chartrand's graphic artwork, graphic design of the bee that our staff wore during the alarm exhibition. So thank you. Somebody had asked that on the feed, so I just wanted to make sure that you saw that, and I hope you did this time. So again, thank you, Laura and Kelly Fran. Tonight, we would like to reflect on the year that was 2020. Alarm opened 1 year ago last Thursday, and what a year it's been. In a few moments, we will be joined by speakers who participated in the opening evening last January, as well as speakers representing 50 by 30. We have also invited 5 speakers from the University of Waterloo's Interdisciplinary Center on Climate Change to offer their thoughts on the need for ambitious emission reduction targets and the positive impact of bold regional climate action of an action plan and what it could have on creating a more just and sustainable society. As the evening progresses, feel free to ask a question in the comment area below. At the end, time permitting, there will be an optional question and answer period. One of the positive things about our unique museum, oddly enough, is we do not have a collection. And that has allowed us to be nimble, reflect what's going on in today's society, and even opportunistic in choosing themes that are current and that keep us relevant. When planning first began for what became Alarm, we wanted to, as we sat with the curator, our focus was actually on featuring women artists on the theme of technology or art and technology at play. In an early meeting with then board member Jane Tingley, who is also a wonderful artist and curator, we began to chat about what could be cool, timely, and relevant within that theme. In a very short time in our first meeting, while keeping women artists and curators at the core, the theme quickly changed to focus on climate change, or as we chose to say, climate emergency. And the name Alarm emerged also and fit perfectly. Fast forwarding to today, as we begin to see the light of the tunnel, of the COVID tunnel, I can only think that COVID is nothing compared to the collapse of our ecosystem. Alarm, responding to our responding to our climate emergency, featured 4 separate exhibitions, 3 at the museum and 1 in Uptown Waterloo. Anchored by an extraordinarily world-class exhibition featuring 10 interdisciplinary women and co-anchored by Jane Tingley and Nina Ziegler, Agents for Change Facing Our Anthropocene was born. The companion exhibitions included Extinction for Families, which featured rainforest frogs, Melting Ice, featuring 2 amazing and local artists, one who ventured to the North Pole and the other to the South Pole to capture incredible images, and the 4th, Spectrum, the climate emergency experience that took place in Uptown Waterloo. The theme of ecological change at the intersection of science and technology and art, in my opinion, was brilliant visually and supported by demographically targeted companion exhibitions. So thank you, Jane, and thank you, Nina. And thank you to the many Canadian, the local, and the international artists whose names you can find at themuseum.ca. It is our hope that through open and direct and respectful dialogue this evening, we will all hear the call to action and become agents for change. Enough for me. I've preached enough to you. I feel like I should pass the collection plate around now. So it is my pleasure to now invite somebody who at the opening a year ago was invited to the stage by myself, and much to my surprise and the enjoyment of all, broke out into song. So I'm pleased to welcome our Member of Provincial Parliament for Kitchener Centre, Laura May Lindo. Laura?
Thank you so much, David. And thank you for inviting me again to join you in this call to address the climate emergency. It's interesting to think that just a year ago, we had all gathered in the museum in Kitchener Centre. We were all able to be very close to each other, filling the room, coming together with a vision of what sustainable life, not just in the region, but across the province, not just across the province, but across Turtle Island. We came together to think about what a sustainable future could actually look like. And I think part of why I broke into song at that point was because you could feel the love in that same call for the emergency, the call to action to address climate change in some very real and practical ways. Today, I'm joining everybody from my living room right here in Kitchener, and I feel the same sense of urgency. And oddly enough, I think I'm going to break into song again. I'm pretty sure that the song that I sang at the time was Baba Fururu, which is a song in reference to one of the deities that guides me and my practice and my leadership, not just here, but in my life. And I feel the need to call on him again. He represents wisdom. He represents our elders. And I feel like it's important to bring that energy right into this conversation before I go on to one other little piece and then let you folks go. So here we go. Baba fururu o bakanye eleribo elediva o basi basawo eyibo he basi bawo enwaye awaloro awaloro enes you come. It's kind of interesting as I sang that, my son who just turned 6 came out. And it's interesting because we have to do this work to prepare this earth, to prepare Mother Earth to be able to sustain the children. That's why we need to do this work. Imagine a world where we took seriously the teaching from Indigenous elders all across Turtle Island. Imagine a world where when we had these discussions about the climate emergency, we took seriously the teachings and the wisdom of elders that they are bringing to us as those that, in my case, have been settled on this land, or for others who are settlers on this land. Imagine what this world could look like. And imagine if we took seriously the need to mobilize our own privilege. Now, for me, people see that as I'm the member of provincial parliament. What will I bring to Queen's Park? Will I stand up for real investment in climate action? Will I stand up at Queen's Park and make speeches and push the government to do better? And I will. I am committed to delivering a Green New Democratic deal for Ontario. But I think it's also really important for us to pay attention to the everyday, day-to-day things that we can do so that we, with our actions as adults in this world, can guide the actions of the young people in this world at the same time. When we stand up and we talk about the need for food sustainability, to provide the resources necessary for people to understand what it means to grow locally, to treat Mother Earth in the way that she should be treated so that everybody does have access to healthy foods. We're talking about addressing climate and the climate crisis and participating in a brand new way of being that is more sustainable for Mother Earth. When we talk about investing in public transit, when we're making sure that we take into consideration the realities of, forcing people to buy really expensive cars rather than investing in public transit alternatives that allow us to protect Mother Earth. When we start standing up for those public options so that more people can get around, that is climate action. That's mobilizing your privilege. When we talk about affordable housing and we say we want to make sure that any new developments they've got the energy retrofits, that we're looking at older complexes where people are living and making sure that they also are able to invest in their homes in a way that also sustains this planet. That is climate action. And most importantly, one of the pieces that I feel like we kind of sort of gloss over is the need to see climate action as yet another tool in the fight for racial justice and racial equity. It's not an accident that we ask to center the voices of Indigenous elders across Turtle Island as we do this work. It's not an accident. It's that we're trying to see a vision and create a sustainable world that actually centers people that have been forgotten, people whose treaties have been ignored, and we can do this. We actually should just laugh at those that say that it's impossible to make these investments. We should laugh and we should bring joy and love and care into this discussion, because the pandemic, as horrible as it is providing us with one more opportunity to do better, to challenge ourselves to do better in our day-to-day and in the very large discussions and decisions that we make, whether it's in the community right here in Waterloo Region or in the broader community for me when I'm at Queen's Park and I'm fighting for Ontario. Together we can do this. And the love and care that we see in the conversation that happened a year ago and is happening again today, that is how we can address the climate crisis. So thank you again for having me. And I can't wait to hear from everybody else.
Thank you so very, very much. And now the moment that Claire and Caitlin, who are directing and taking care of the technology tonight, have feared the most. Through the marvel of technology, we hope, I'd like to welcome Mayor Barry Verbanovic to share his reflections.
Good evening. I'm Kitchener Mayor Barry Verbanovic, and I'm so pleased to be able to be a part of this evening's final alarm dialogue hosted by the museum. Alarm has played a crucial role in bringing issues of climate change to the forefront, shining the light on our current climate crisis. It has illuminated how we can all make transformative connections with our changing climate, as well as the role that each of us plays in bringing about this change. At the City of Kitchener, we're committed to climate action. Council and staff understand our role as global citizens and the need to be prepared for the effects of climate change. We understand that through actions such as reducing the city's greenhouse gas or GHG emissions, through conservation, efficiencies, and innovation, we are providing an opportunity for the City of Kitchener to continue our work and further our strategic priorities. We also understand that social sustainability is a core part of making climate action successful. This means ensuring that we look at sustainability through an equity lens. By doing so, we can more easily and quickly progress in our climate action and ensure wider sustainability goals are met to protect all of our citizens. As a city, we have already begun to focus closely on the issue of climate action and how we can play our part in combating the effects of climate change. We're proud to be a part of the Climate Action Waterloo Region collaboration, the group behind the development of Waterloo Region's first community action plan on climate change. Their initial GHG reduction target of 6% below 2010 levels by 2020 has been replaced with unanimous municipal and regional support for an 80% reduction by 2050. Corporately, we're also focused on reducing the greenhouse gas emissions generated by city operations, setting a goal of 28% absolute GHG reduction by 2026 based on 2010 levels. In 2020, Kitchener City Council unanimously passed a motion declaring a climate emergency, highlighting the urgent need for strong action in addressing the threats posed by climate change. Kitchener prides itself on being a forward-thinking and innovative city, and I've been encouraged to see that reflected in the continued advocacy by council and community groups on this critical issue. As we continue to move forward, we want to ensure that climate action remains at the forefront of our minds, guiding our actions and decisions. This played a key role during the development of our 2019 to 2022 strategic plan, which includes specific quantifiable SMART goals, which have been mapped to the UN's 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, at a high level, and Kitchener's Platinum certification for ISO 37120 by the World Council on City Data, where we've reported over 90 of the 104 indicators within the WCCD administered ISO 37120, the first international standard for city data. The City of Kitchener is now amongst a select group of global cities reporting at the highest platinum level. Kitchener is committed to be a leader in this work. However, we're realistic, and we know there's always room to improve on what we're doing. As such, the city will continue to undergo strategic work through a federal SDG grant aimed to localize the SDGs through detailed mapping, knowledge building, and establishing process tools, communication, and engagement structures for accountability. In addition, the city is working with experts, leaders, and ambitious municipalities globally as part of a process to examine barriers that hold back progress. This work also explores transformational changes to traditional strategic planning and governance structures with the goal of achieving our strategic goals more effectively and efficiently. One of the key lessons that we've learned both from our history and the SDGs is that municipal government can only succeed when it works in true partnership with the entire community. From collaboration with private businesses to partnership initiatives with community organizations and other orders of government, we will continue to work with the partners that have enabled Kitchener's growth and success. Tonight's event is a perfect example of how we can build on these partnerships, with each and every one of us working together to bring about the changes that we all want to see in our community. I'm confident that with our continued collaboration, we can reach our collective goals, and in a perfect world, we can even surpass them. In the words of Desmond Tutu, 25 years ago, people could be excused for not knowing much or doing much about climate change. Today, we have no excuse. Thank you again to the museum for hosting this evening's event and for keeping this important conversation alive in our community.
Well, congratulations, Claire and Caitlin. The video worked. And thank you to Mayor Barry. That was wonderful. Now I'd like to welcome from 50 by 30, a partner and good friend of the museum, Kai Reimer Watts. Kai?
Hi there. Thank you, David. I'm assuming the audio is going through fine. My name's Kai. I'm a community organizer with the 50 by 30 campaign. And just to give a bit of backgrounder, this emerged out of the local movement for climate justice here in Waterloo Region. I'm also a teacher and graduate student at Wilfrid Laurier University in community psychology. And I'm one of many, many residents in the region who is deeply concerned about our shared climate future, which motivates me and so many others to do this work. 50 by 30 is a grassroots community-led campaign advocating for Waterloo Region to commit to a 50% community-wide reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And this is in line with the imperatives of climate science and centering social justice and well-being. This campaign builds on the public commitment made by regional municipalities in 2019 by declaring a climate emergency, something many of us also advocated for, recognizing the existential risks posed by climate change globally and here in our region. This emergency, like the pandemic, is already impacting on public health and well-being, and hence demands our shared urgency and attention. So at this critical moment we are in of the COVID pandemic, which has clearly upended our communities and local lives and economy, 50 by 30 aims to build back better through a just green recovery together. So with that intro, I'd like to thank the museum for partnering with us for tonight's event and to supporting our work throughout the community over the past year or so. As you said, David, during this time, climate organizers pivoted from hosting the largest climate strike ever in the region's history, hard to imagine now, to then hosting a shoe strike for climate justice this past summer. And that was in partnership with Unsheltered Campaign KW, where over 400 pairs of warm winter boots and shoes donated to benefit some of the unsheltered individuals on the front lines of climate change in our community and help make the links between climate change, affordable housing, and justice. We also partnered with Bridge Center for Architecture at UW in a virtual event this past fall. And during this, over 70 people came together to co-imagine a more just green Waterloo Region, the kind of visioning we know is vital to help make that future happen. And you can see the outcomes of that exercise on our site. We partnered with local Indigenous organizers as well, continue to support their calls for land back as another critical part of the solution to developing a more equitable and sustainable, truly sustainable Waterloo Region. So this is just a glimpse of some of the work that's emerged under the umbrella of climate justice and 50 by 30 here. And it's so clear that this work has excited and energized many, many people throughout the region as an idea whose time has come. We as a campaign team want to start, the huge thank you for everyone who continues to support this. Also recognizing we truly can't get to 50 by 30 and more just green Waterloo Region without you. We need your ideas and enthusiasm. And if you're not involved yet, one of my co-organizers, Laura, will be sharing a wide range of ways later tonight that you can be. As the big central takeaway from tonight, we need you. The climate crisis needs you to join with others, join with your neighbors and all those you can get on board to act for climate justice. I want to recognize 50 by 30 is part of a global movement, striving to center justice concerns in all climate action work moving forward. Recognizing climate change already impacts the most vulnerable and marginalized first and most, people who so often have done the least to contribute to this crisis. So if you are part of a community that may be disproportionately affected by climate change, we'd like to hear from and work with you as well, and work with you in solidarity, because that's work that we should all be doing. The COVID pandemic has been a massive wake-up call that large-scale crises that are global in nature can strike quickly and strike hard at the local level as well. And we have to be prepared for those impacts. Ideally, working to act in advance to prevent the worst from happening, rather than simply reacting when the crisis is already bearing down on our communities and when it may be too late to prevent the worst. And so that's really what the 50 by 30 campaign is all about, recognizing that to prevent the worst possible outcomes of climate change, the science is clear. We need to act now to bend the curve on our carbon pollution and other greenhouse gases that are causing this crisis. We need to reduce global emissions 50% by 2030, because for people and the rest of creation alive today, speed in line with the science is justice. So to imagine this, we can think of all the effort we've had to put in to strive to bend the curve on the spread of COVID, to reduce its worst impacts. We need something similar, large scale and community wide, to tackle the climate crisis. And we can do this while building communities that are actually better for all. So the time is ripe, perhaps overdue, for all municipalities, all communities to step up and take ambitious action, showing what's possible. And many are. So some examples of that, you just heard from Mayor Verbanovich in Kitchener. C40 Cities is a network of 97 cities around the world that have committed to staying below a 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in global warming. This is the aspirational limit of the Paris Climate Agreement that Canada has signed on to, and that includes 3 cities here in Canada, Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto. To stay below 1.5 C effectively means committing to 50 by 30. There are cities around the world already committing to 50 by 30 or better, including many cities in Europe and elsewhere, way ahead of us here, with commitments to carbon neutrality by 2030. In Canada, we're a bit further behind. However, Vancouver has committed, as of last year, explicitly to the 50 by 30 target. And Halifax made a commitment to a 75% reduction below 2016 levels by 2030, and aiming for 95 by mid-century. So this begs the question, what is Waterloo Region doing? While we have made some ambitious steps forward for climate action and justice throughout our communities, and the region has acknowledged the climate emergency we're in, we have yet to respond appropriately by committing to a clear 10-year target based in the science, and of course then working towards that. We need 50 by 30. The good news is, if we take this leap to do the work necessary to get there, because it will be hard work, then there will be all kinds of positive benefits that result from this for our communities, many of which you'll hear in tonight's presentation, but even beyond what we can really imagine today. Rather than being sitting ducks unprepared for climate change, we will be ready, and we will be investing in the solutions that are needed right here to better weather the changes to come, while building far more livable, just, resilient, and thriving communities. Waterloo Region has multiple esteemed centers of learning, a thriving tech and agricultural sector, incredibly diverse local knowledge, including Indigenous knowledge on sustainable land-based practices that goes back thousands of years, and we got some insight into today. And so we have all the tools we need to jumpstart an ecologically based circular economy of the future. We really just need the will to do it. So with that being said, I'm very pleased to introduce another amazing partner for tonight's event, the Interdisciplinary Center for Climate Change through the University of Waterloo. They've generously tapped into the expertise of their faculty to provide some further insight into what we can do right here in Waterloo Region to help us meet this critical 50 by 30 target. IC3 also participated in a dialogue at the museum last year. So it was fitting to invite them back to share their insights on how to respond effectively to climate change. These presentations are pre-recorded. They're between 5 to 7 minutes each, and there's 5 of them. And following this, there will be an opportunity for Q&A with the speakers. So our first speaker from IC3, who I'll introduce, will be Dr. Sarah Birch. Sarah is an associate professor in the Department of Geography and Environmental Management at the University of Waterloo, and a Canada Research Chair in Sustainability Governance and Innovation. Sarah's research addresses the question of transformative change in response to climate change and sustainability challenges. So welcome, Sarah. We look forward to hearing from you, and the recording should start shortly.
Hi, my name is Sarah Birch, and I'm an Associate Professor and Canada Research Chair of Sustainability Governance and Innovation at the University of Waterloo. And I'm very happy to be here to spend just a few minutes talking about the urgent challenge of climate change. I would like to talk a bit about what Canada has promised to do in response to climate change. I'd like to talk about a couple of issues that I think we don't discuss enough, but I think are crucial to our success in addressing climate change in an inclusive and ambitious way. And I'd like to wrap up with just a few thoughts on what your responsibility might be, what my responsibility might be to address as individuals this immense challenge. So to start off, what do we know for sure? We know for sure that climate is already changing. This isn't a challenge that is distant in time to happen in 100 or 200 years to someone else in some other place. It is happening right now to us already and to others around the globe. And we know that we're responsible, that our extraction and burning of coal, oil, and gas, of fossil fuels, is producing these greenhouse gas emissions that are going into the atmosphere and leading to this warming. So as a result of that warming, we're seeing rising sea levels, we're seeing tragic impacts on other species and biodiversity, so we're seeing massive species extinctions. We are seeing challenges in our food supply, agricultural crops, for instance, that are now failing in places where they were once succeeding because of changing precipitation and changing temperatures. We're seeing prolonged drought, extreme floods, more frequent and prolonged storms. And all of this is threatening the lives and livelihoods of some of the world's most vulnerable people, and also having impacts here in Canada as well. So these are just a few of the impacts of climate change that we're seeing now and will only accelerate into the future. So the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, this global body of scientists, have told us that in order to constrain warming to safer levels, we need to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030 and move to net neutral. That means emitting no more greenhouse gas emissions than the planet's oceans and forests and ecosystems can suck up by 2050. However, Canada is a wealthy nation that has benefited immensely from extracting, selling, combusting fossil fuels. So from a justice perspective, it's important that we do our fair share to reduce greenhouse gas emissions that we have produced historically and that we continue to produce today. So this is why we're talking about this really ambitious target of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030, even more than that 45% target by 2030. How are we doing? Not so well. We have set the target of only 30% reduction in Canada's greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Which isn't particularly ambitious, but we are starting to see put in place some important policies that will help us make progress towards these targets. Ratcheting up the carbon tax is just one. It is not a silver bullet, but it is one of many really important tools that will help us to meet our targets, but also vehicle fuel efficiency standards, standards for green buildings, urban planning so that we can live closer to our work and closer to our play so that we reduce our time in our cars. All of these are strategies that we need to accelerate to reach these more ambitious targets. But the good news is that most of the technologies we need to do this already exist. We don't need to wait for some, magical invention to come along 50 years down the line to do this. We have the vast majority of these technologies already in hand, but accelerating their uptake, scaling them out, that's the nature of the challenge we face right now. A couple of issues that I wish we would talk more about. One is just how many additional benefits truly sustainable communities can offer us. So communities that are dense, that have more vibrant and connected urban nature, that offer access to local food. These are sustainable communities that offer, for instance, also affordable housing and vibrant community spaces. These communities are more resilient to climate change impacts that I just mentioned, and they can also be much lower carbon while also offering improved physical health and stronger communities overall. So I wish we would talk a bit more about these visions of sustainable communities that incorporate all of those different things that matter to us, not just greenhouse gas emissions, not just economic prosperity, but all of those different dimensions of sustainability. I also think that we really neglect a conversation around where sustainability solutions and sustainable practices come from. And in my view, one of the most exciting group of folks that these solutions come from is small businesses. We know that because of the COVID-19 pandemic, small businesses have been incredibly hard hit. But we're finding, I and my team at the University of Waterloo, that small businesses that are pursuing sustainability in a really ambitious way and managing their impact on climate change in a really ambitious way are also more resilient to these crises and shocks like COVID-19. So I think we need to do a lot more to build capacity in the business community to address climate change and to contribute to that holistic sustainability. So to wrap up, just a couple of words on who's responsible for taking action. I think too often we talk about, we lay the guilt and the blame at the feet of individuals, you and I, to make individual behavior changes that will, push us along this path towards decarbonization and sustainable communities. But this is a collective challenge. You don't decide how your community is laid out. You don't decide the fuel efficiency of all vehicles. You don't decide where your electricity comes from or where your heat comes from. Those are collective choices made by your elected representatives, by elected officials. So what can you do? Of course, you need to vote. This is a really important tool that you have here at your disposal to put pressure on elected officials to make policy that matters to you. But there are other ways of making your voices heard. Pick up the phone, send an email, write a letter, use social media, go to events on these topics to send that signal that this matters to you. But I don't want to write off entirely how important individual action is. Your own choices about what you eat, about what you drive, about how you live, that closes that circle between you, that loop between you and the elected officials who represent you. It sends the signal this matters, and it also allows you to live in a way that's aligned with your values. So this is a collective challenge with a really important role for individuals. But I think, to sum up, I would just say, we need to move faster towards ratcheting down our greenhouse gas emissions. Thankfully, most of the technologies already exist and the practices already exist to help us do that. So we just need to scale up and deepen those changes. Thanks very much.
Hi there. Thank you so much for that message from Dr. Sarah Birch. Coming up now, just getting used to this lag here. I want to introduce Dr. Byron Williston, who's a professor in the Faculty of Arts at Wilfrid Laurier University. Byron works on the ethics of climate change, the ethics and politics of sustainability, technologies of the Anthropocene, New Earth politics, and the philosophical foundations of Canadian environmental policy. So we have clearly heard why 50 by 30 matters, and Byron is going to take that even further. Over to him. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Byron Williston, and I'm a professor of philosophy at Wilfrid Laurier University, as well as a member of the Interdisciplinary Center on Climate Change. I specialize in the ethics of climate change and have been asked by the organizers of tonight's event to say a few words about Waterloo Region's 50 by 30 initiative from this perspective. There are other speakers here who know a whole lot more than I do about the policy dimensions of the initiative, so I won't have anything to say about that. Instead, I want to explain why climate change is such a tricky ethical issue and how we can avoid some of the mental traps we get stuck in when we think about the demands it places on us. Also, I want to say why I think the 50 by 30 project is such an encouraging move in the right ethical direction. So why is climate change an ethical problem at all, as opposed to, say, a purely scientific or policy problem? Well, ethics has to do with aiming our actions at two broad goals: harm reduction and the promotion of well-being. Ethical thinking can show us why we ought to care about these goals. Even better, it gives us conceptual tools for working through the conflicts we inevitably encounter as we pursue them. Now, nobody needs to be reminded of the serious harms and threats to well-being posed by runaway climate change. Catastrophic hurricanes, prolonged droughts, sea level rise, forced migration, and civil conflict are just some of the things that we have to look forward to, unfortunately. And no serious person doubts the main causes of all of this: profligate greenhouse gas emissions, especially from the world's richest nations. But if all of this is so clear, why don't we simply change our ways? The reason is that climate change is a particularly complicated ethical problem, and those who benefit most from carbon pollution have used this fact about it as an excuse for doing nothing and using their power to encourage others to believe that nothing can be done. As a result of this, we're stuck in a kind of gnarly mental trap. Let me explain what I mean by this with a very simple example, one meant to illustrate the basic nature or structure of moral thinking. So Jill steals Jack's bike. Here we have three clear moral elements, or elements of the moral picture: an agent of wrongdoing, a victim of that wrongdoing, and a harm. Because it's simple, we know how to repair the situation. Jill should simply give the bike back and perhaps also apologize to Jack for stealing it. Or if the bike has been damaged, she should compensate Jack for its loss in a way that he finds satisfying. Now, in real life, this simple picture gets complicated in all kinds of ways, but we always implicitly refer back to it for basic moral guidance. Climate change, unfortunately, seems to undermine the picture completely. First, carbon pollution emerges from billions of point sources, like every time you flick the switch on your gas stove. Second, its victims are spread across the whole planet, even if they're concentrated more in some places than others. They're also spread across time, right? The victims are there in the present as well as in the future. In other words, agency and harm are completely fragmented in this case. And this has allowed us the comforting thought that fixing the problem is always someone else's job. Just about every excuse that we've come up with over the past 30 years or so for essentially doing nothing about climate change exploits this fragmentation of agency. Think of the refrain we hear so often from defenders of tar sands expansion. Canada is responsible for only 2% of global emissions, so why should we act aggressively unless others do first? This waiting around for others to act is the essence of the mental trap that I've mentioned. Because of course, virtually any single polluting group can say the same thing. The result is precisely what we have gotten from decades of international climate diplomacy. Near universal inertia backed up by pointing the finger at somebody else, saying in effect, that other guy has to act before we do. This is the path of moral laziness. It's reactive thinking, the morally corrupt excuse making of the ethical follower. You know, when Greta Thunberg exclaimed to a group of adults at the UN that if we persist in our ways, future generations will never forgive us. Everybody remembers that very gripping speech, I think. She was shining a bright light on just this way of thinking. She was calling out an entire generation for refusing to take ethical leadership. How do we escape it? How do we get out of this mode of thinking? Fortunately, at the most general level, it's entirely clear what we should do. Build an economy that does not require carbon pollution, and do this in a way that focuses on both enhancing everyone's lives and helping to lift up folks who are currently marginalized. I'm happy to see that those are exactly the principles underlying the 50 by 30 initiative. But I want to emphasize something else about it, namely that it's an exemplary display of moral courage and leadership. I really doubt that all those grassroots people behind the initiative could have been motivated to carry on with it for as long as they have if they'd been obsessed with what everyone else is doing. Ethical leaders simply do what needs doing, regardless of what other actors are doing. They seek coalitions of forward-thinking people, not excuses for business as usual. The 50 by 30 initiative shows us all a way out of the reactive mental trap we've been ensnared in for far too long on the most pressing concern humanity has ever faced. Let's all get behind it. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Wow. This is a lot to take in, and an amazing message from both speakers so far. Thank you, Byron, for that message and call to moral leadership, which absolutely is what this campaign is about. And we hope others will take up that call also. Now, I would like to introduce Dr. Stephanie Scott, who is a professor in the Department of Geography and Environmental Management at the University of Waterloo. Stephanie's research focuses on sustainable food systems in China and Canada, and her work documents the emergence of the ecological agriculture sector and alternative food networks in China.
Bonjour, Shego. My name is Stephanie Scott. I'm part of the University of Waterloo's Department of Geography and Environmental Management, and I've also been a member of the Food System Roundtable of Waterloo Region since it began in 2007. I'm also a settler on this land of the Arawandran, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee people. As many of you know, food and agriculture production is a major driver of the Earth system exceeding what are called planetary boundaries. Food is also one of the fastest ways to achieve carbon emission reductions. So with that in mind, I have 5 key recommendations for local government action that I'd like to share. And collectively, I think these commitments would put just and sustainable food systems, at the heart of a green future. So the first is to develop a food strategy, which involves facilitating a multi-stakeholder platform, enabling dialogue and collaboration across agendas at different levels, defining priorities and coordinating different interventions. I think there's great promise to develop an action plan, considering the benefits of integrating, climate change, policies to affect climate, food, health, and land policies to support ecological restoration and social resilience. And we can also build on the 2012 food charter that was passed in the region. Second priority is Indigenous leadership and land back. I think we as a society really need to reclaim a land-based ethics, the ethical relationships to the land and to all our relations. And Indigenous leaders have so much wisdom to offer about how to live in right relationship with the land. Indigenous leadership will also help us to reframe our food system and shift from thinking about food as a product or a commodity to food as a commons. And I think across the board, we need to work on building an economy of care and of reciprocity. The third priority is regenerative agriculture and healthy soils and water. As you may know, synthetic fertilizer production is one of the most energy intensive aspects of the agriculture sector. And so there's 2 prongs to this recommendation. First relates to providing technical and financial support for regenerative and agroecology practices on both small and large scale farms, and revitalizing degraded ecosystems. How should we do this? We can look to examples like the Agricultural Land Use Services Program, or ALUS. Also, Canadian Organic Growers has a program to support the transition to organic. The Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario has a farmer-led research program. to facilitate farmer experimentation, to adapt to climate change and mitigate emissions. And so learning from also the experience of farms in Waterloo Region, like Fennings Organic Farm and Fertile Ground, these are local champions of regenerative agriculture here. The second prong of this recommendation is about supporting opportunities for urban and peri-urban production. There's a lot of new farmers. There's also at-risk youth who could really benefit from becoming involved in growing food. There may be opportunities to support an incubator farm for new farmers who are keen to practice regenerative agriculture and access land. There's an example in Ottawa called Just Food that has an incubator farm. And then my fourth recommendation is about promoting a circular economy to reduce food loss and waste, which is responsible for about 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So food waste can really be a focal point for food sustainability, food system sustainability in cities. So this could involve voluntary agreements in the food, retail, and food manufacturing sectors to collaborate on system-wide food loss and waste reduction. So I think there's a lot more that could be done in that regard. And then the fifth and final recommendation is about food relocalization and planetary health diet, what's come to be called a planetary health diet. And so there's various prongs here. First of all, I think there's research that suggests that more than half of the food that we import to Southern Ontario could actually be produced within this province. And so can we invest in local food infrastructure, like promoting regional markets for products and crops, like especially fruits and vegetables, promoting shorter food supply chains. So there's opportunities to support organizations such as Open Food Network Canada, which was born here in Waterloo Region as an open access platform through which producers can sell online and help to build a resilient local food economy. So supporting organizations like that, supporting Bailey's Local Foods, an online farmers market here in Waterloo, and other sustainable local food businesses. Also consider supporting, a business incubator for food processing. And then another aspect of this recommendation is about providing support and training for households to preserve the harvest, by fermenting or dehydrating or canning foods. And this, I think, should also be part of emergency preparedness. And then finally, and importantly, relating to diet, considering ways to promote alternative sources of protein and things like meatless Mondays or vegan before 6 p.m. To shift away from red meat and dairy consumption in particular, and sort of rethinking our food environments to nudge people in that direction. So in summary, I think we're sorely missing a land-based ethics to step up as a society to our responsibilities to care for our soil, our water, and our biodiversity. And municipal efforts in particular should weave climate policies and food policies together and use lessons from agroecology to achieve climate targets. The priority goal, as I've said, is to develop a comprehensive food strategy and corresponding policies involving all relevant municipal departments and representatives from key stakeholder groups. The food system is much more than farmers and food banks. And so I suggest let's put our minds and hearts together to improve it. Thank you.
So much, Stephanie, for that wisdom. It's really good to speak to how we also grow our food and to really consider all sectors of our economy that need to be integrated as we begin to develop more sustainable systems. So the next speaker is Dr. Paul Parker, who is a professor jointly appointed to the School of Environment, Enterprise, and Development and the Department of Geography and Environmental Management at the University of Waterloo. Paul's research focuses on building sustainable communities by creating win-win opportunities for the environment and economy. Over to you, Paul.
Hello, my name is Paul Parker, and I'm a professor in the Faculty of Environment at the University of Waterloo. I have also been on the board at REAP Green Solutions for over 20 years and support local climate actions in our community. I would like to share some of the climate solutions that we've already demonstrated locally, but now encourage everyone to take broader action. Let's start at home. This is an easy place to cut carbon emissions. Every purchase of a home should come with an energy evaluation, so the new homeowner knows how to improve the home's performance, cut the costs and the pollution. Current owners should also have evaluations and take action, including our low-income housing. We can do this. Since 1999, REAP has identified residential energy efficiency retrofits. Typically, we can cut 2 tons per year per house when these actions are taken. For bigger actions and bigger impacts, we need to shift away from fossil fuels and move to new cold weather electric heat pumps using low carbon electricity. For new construction, we need to set higher standards. Hamilton recently built a social housing project to Passive House standard, an excellent example. We also can add distributed generation. We should install PV on every roof. Waterloo had Canada's first solar neighborhood back in 2005. Residential PV was relatively new then. It cost $10 a watt. But now it's down to $2 a watt, an 80% reduction. So with that 80% off the price, now is the time to do it comprehensively. The utilities take on a new role as the coordinators of the smart grid with distributed generation and storage. Another good idea was working with our neighbors, a group purchase of new technology. We did this in 2010 with the solar hot water heaters to replace natural gas hot water heaters. A group of 10 households got together, bought the same technology to reduce the risk rather than people each buying different ones. Why not do the same for heat pump? Support your neighbors, work together, reduce the risk. We can do this. At our places of work, we know we can do better. In 2012, the University of Waterloo opened Environment 3, its LEED Platinum building. We have the technology to build better than code. We need to think of the life cycle costs, not just the initial costs. In 2018, Evolve 1 opened as a zero carbon office building. Community leaders like Cora are excellent, but we need improved building codes to have bigger impacts so that all new buildings are built to be zero carbon. Current research, we're happy to work with partners. We thank the museum for being a partner with Project Neutral to encourage us to check our personal carbon footprint to see where we have the biggest emissions and where we can make changes. Partnering with REAP, our students have helped identify options for bigger reductions. We need to decarbonize, improve efficiency, and switch from natural gas furnaces and water heaters to electric heat pumps. Support e-transport, purchase electric or hybrid vehicles, well-established technologies. I've been driving a Toyota hybrid for over 20 years. Toyota, I hope they make RAV4s. I hope they start making the plug-in hybrid RAV4s here, creating jobs in this new economy. And finally, next on the horizon, electric planes are now available to train the next generation of pilots, and someone needs to be the first in Canada to take this action. At Waterloo Region International Airport, we have 30 aircraft for training. Each E-plane that replaces a conventional plane could displace 1,000 tons of CO2 over 20 years of flying 1,000 hours a year. Let's make Waterloo a leader in electric aviation. Let's create a low carbon airport. We have the answers. Let's increase the action. We have a target. Each decision should help us reach that 50% reduction by 2030. This is Waterloo. We'd like to speak with our actions. Thank you. Hello.
Thank you so much, Paul, for sharing those ideas of what is being done and what can be done. It's very clear to me and from your message that so many of these solutions are there. As you say, we can do this. A lot of them could use more support. So I hope that will be an outcome of tonight's event as well. Next up, we have Dr. Amelia Clark, who is an associate professor in the School of Environment, Enterprise and Development at the University of Waterloo. Amelia's current research interests include community sustainable development strategies, corporate social and environmental responsibility, youth-led social entrepreneurship, and youth and innovation. Over to you, Amelia.
Hello, my name is Amelia Clark, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Waterloo. And this evening, I'm going to talk to you about deep decarbonization at the local level. In essence, this is built off of our research that we've been doing at the university to look into best practices for reaching carbon neutrality in cities worldwide. And from that, we've drawn out what is possible and that it really is possible to reach carbon neutrality in cities. So where do our emissions come from in the local area? In general, in cities, the greenhouse gas emissions come from buildings, they come from transportation, and they come from waste. And then it also matters what's in the electricity in terms of renewable energy versus fossil fuel. There's emissions from electricity, and our local carbon sinks matter in terms of the inventory of greenhouse gas emissions. But in addition to what we produce locally, our consumption and our investment choices are our responsibility, even if those emissions happen outside the region. So in 2017, an inventory was done here in the local region to see where our emissions came from. And what they found is that 49% of our emissions community-wide come from transportation, and then a large percentage come from buildings, which have been organized here into workplaces at 27% and our homes at 18%. And then because there's agriculture in our region, 5% of our emissions come from agricultural and food and 1% from waste. So what can we do about that? And what can the local government do about that? There are a number of strategies the local government can do, and we've organized those into 4 different categories. There are engagement strategies they can do. There's policy tools they can use, such as bylaws and development standards. There's financial tools they can use, such as infrastructure investments and market-based instruments. An example of a market-based instrument would be the price that it costs to ride the bus. And there are also green economy initiatives that can be undertaken. We've done quite a bit of research on the governance mechanisms because it's really quite important, not just that you have targets and an implementation plan, but how are you going to oversee the implementation of that plan? How are you going to enable engagement and collective action by not just the local government, but by local businesses and other actors in the local region? So we've done a lot of thinking on what those governance structures should look like and what best practices are in the world. But I'm not going to get into that this evening. So if you're interested in that, you can look deeper into the research we've done in this particular topic. In summary then, you need a clear vision, ambitious targets, and an implementation plan, and then implement that plan and continually improve. And our goal is really to break the carbon lock-in. In other words, shift and transform our systems so that they're all fossil-free. We want to do this in a way that's environmentally and socially just. So our region has actually committed, and our local cities as well, committed to an 80% GHG reduction by 2050. But since then, the thinking both globally and nationally has moved further, and the new targets deemed necessary are actually carbon neutrality by 2050. But that's not enough. We need interim targets, and the current talk is around a 2030 target. The IPCC 1.5 report says we need 45% reduction in global emissions if we're going to stay between 1.5 and 2 degrees warming. So what can the local governments do? Well, aggressive short and long-term targets, and then backcast from those targets to come up with an implementation plan that's going to put us on the right trajectory. Bring a climate lens and a sustainability justice lens in all decision-making, and monitor progress and continually improve. What can business do and other actors? Well, figure out how to bring your operations to such a place where all your products and or services are done in a carbon neutral way. And then we as citizens also have a role. Some of the biggest things we can do is think about the heating and cooling of our home and how to get off fossil fuels there. Think about our transportation choices, and think about our food choices and other consumption patterns. We can also support the government and encourage them to take more climate action. So I'm going to stop there, but if you're interested in our research on this, we do have a website and you can find more information there. But let me just close by encouraging each of you to think about what more can I do to help address this climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia, and truly thank you to all of the speakers. It's so we're so grateful that for you to have shared your time with us, and it's amazing to even just get a glimpse of kind of the tip of the iceberg of the range of solutions that absolutely are possible, that are already in many cases underway, but could use more support. And so kind of the age-old excuse that we don't know how to do this, we can't do this, is clearly a myth. And you know, there's so much wisdom that exists in this region. We absolutely just need to find the courage to take the next steps forward. So with that, I want to pass things to Laura. I understand we're running a little behind, but it's really important as folks kind of go back to your lives following this event, that you really consider how to get involved. And of course, we would love for you to get involved with us. So Laura is going to share a range of ways to do that. Following her, there is going to be a Q&A, so please do stick around. This is a fantastic opportunity to ask some of those speakers your burning climate justice questions. Okay, so over to you, Laura.
Thanks, Kai. So yeah, those videos were amazing, and I encourage everyone to stick with us for the Q&A that's coming up next with these remarkable presenters. And I know thank yous are happening later, but I want to thank all of our marvelous speakers from IC3 for the good work that they do every day and for sharing their wisdom with us this evening. And thanks to the museum for their leadership and vision in hosting a year-long exhibition to sound the alarm about the climate crisis. When I spoke to you earlier this evening, I said that the climate crisis is a relationship problem resulting from a breakdown in our relationships with each other and with the land. But as we consider the delays we're witnessing in governments at all levels in taking meaningful action to avoid the worst impacts of the climate crisis, it becomes clear that we are in the midst of a crisis in leadership. As you heard tonight, the science is clear. For a safe climate future, we must embrace the overarching goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. And to reach this goal globally, We must reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030. It's just that simple, and be carbon neutral by 2020 or by 2050, not 80% below 2010, carbon neutral globally. So how can our ambition in Waterloo Region be anything less than this? How can this prosperous and caring region commit to anything less than 50 by 30? These are big goals, but we have the solutions we need to get there. Local governments are critical in this journey. They lay the foundation for every resident and business in their community to make the clean choice an easy choice every time. And this is what our campaign is all about. So I'm here to call you to action and to ask you to support the 50 by 30 campaign. And we hope that you will visit our website and sign and share our petition to let our municipal councils know that you expect them to be leaders and to do our part and to commit to a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, nothing less. This is in line with climate science and centering social justice to build a greener, fairer, more livable Waterloo Region. And after you've signed our petition, please sign up for our newsletter. The campaign is only for a few more months, so you're not committing to, newsletters forever. But if you have our newsletter, you'll hear about all of our upcoming events, our opportunities to participate in public consultations about the region's climate action plan, because you don't want to miss those, and even opportunities to engage directly with elected officials to share your thoughts about the region's plan. So if you're part of an organization, you can also take our pledge. This is a way for businesses, organizations, or institutions in Waterloo Region to endorse the 50 by 30 campaign. And then it'd be great if you would consider being a 50 by 30 champion. These are volunteers who share the message of our campaign with others throughout your community. And you can do this work safely from your home or from whatever location works for you to help get word out over the next couple of months. We have a couple of organizing calls for new champions in the coming days. One is actually this Friday, January 29th from 6 till 7. And the next one is Tuesday, February 2nd from 4 till 5. And I think the registration links are going into the chat as I speak. And be sure to register for our next public event. And that's going to be on Monday, February 22nd. You can join us for an evening with Christine Boyle. Chris is a city councillor and a United Church minister in Vancouver, and someone who's been a driving force for climate action for years. And I've known Chris since she started Fossil Free Faith back in 2013. She is a marvelous speaker, and she will share lessons from her work mobilizing community and faith-based climate action, and more recently, and more importantly to our campaign, successfully advocating for Vancouver's Climate Emergency Action Plan. This has Vancouver on track to reduce carbon pollution by 50% by 2030. Again, it can be done. And this registration link will also be in the chat, or you can find it on our website. And finally, a shout out to our friends, the Nith Valley Eco Boosters, who are organizing an event on February 18th. As Sarah Birch so eloquently explained, there is a loop of personal and government action that's central to addressing this collective change. So as you consider personal action, be sure to check out the Nith Valley Eco Boosters upcoming webinar on electric vehicles on the evening of Thursday, February 18th. That's it. Please join us. And now back to you, David.
Thank you very, very much. And before we go to the Q&As, just really hope this evening has been enlightening, and through this event and the exhibition Alarm, we have made some transformative connections, and together we will continue to sound the alarm and make real change in our region and beyond. Thank you for collaborating. Thank you to all of the participants and the presenters this evening. Thank you, Claire and Caitlin. Congratulations. Everything worked brilliantly from the museum's end. And thank you to all of you who are watching tonight for joining the Museum Plus. And we hope to see you again as we shine a light over 2021 on dinosaurs, sound, and the Rolling Stones. So thank you all very much. And to close the evening prior to the Q&As, I'd like to invite Kelly Fran back to the stage.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you again to everybody for, inviting me to be part of this amazing event, and very hopeful in all of the presenters and all that they had to share. And I just want to, again, give a close in prayer. But I want to say that, like we have these treaties, like this one in particular, the Turo Wampum, it's going to take everybody. And I heard that message throughout a lot of the speakers tonight is that it's a shared community responsibility. Climate change and our ways forward is that everybody has to come together with their capacities and to do what we can to ensure our future generations also have that thrive in natural environment. So again, in my Haudenosaunee language, I would just share the very short part of my prayer that I started with, in giving thanks for having things to be thankful for. So nyawa goa, sungwa diso, sungwawi ganyohanyo.
Thank you, Kelly Fran Davis. So now we're going to move to the question and answer period. So I'm going to invite everyone from IC3 if you would like to turn on your video. I've been trying to keep track of all the questions that we've been receiving from the public, and thank you for engaging in the comments as well. This one was addressed in the comments, but I would like to ask the speakers, what do you see as the low-hanging fruit for solutions to reduce emissions here in Waterloo Region that also intersect with social justice?
Caitlin, I got a chance to answer in the chat, so I don't want to dominate the answer to this question. I just saw Stephanie raise her hand, so I'll go silent.
Sure, shall I jump in?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like my 5 strategies were as concrete as I could make them, although I could elaborate on many of them. But I think that a food strategy in collaboration with local government and all kinds of other stakeholders in the region would be a great way to come together, make a plan and roll it out. The Food System Roundtable of Waterloo Region that came together through support from Waterloo Region Public Health since 2007 has done a great job of that, but we've been severely impacted by losing our staff support 4 years ago. So having some more support to help to coordinate that effort would be fantastic. So I would be really keen to hear from folks at the region and the cities to collaborate on that, just as sort of one first step.
That's great. Thank you, Stephanie. Amelia, do you want to add something?
Sure. Low-hanging fruit. In some ways, we're kind of past that, where we have to think about the transformation necessary and work backwards. But some quick things that individuals could do, for example, are look at your diet choices. So that's an easy low-hanging fruit and a quick way to reduce your personal carbon footprint. On a policy level for our region, I would say looking to ensure that all new buildings built in the region are net zero. But to bring a social justice lens to that, a percentage of them should also be social housing, so that we're having these mixed neighborhoods and we avoid green gentrification in the long run. So those are just a couple of examples, but really Stephanie and Paul brought these up in their presentations as well and had a much longer list.
That's great. Thank you, Amelia. Another question that was put in the comments is, what needs to happen to get these very pragmatic and concrete recommendations implemented locally?
If I can offer, like these good ideas, of course, we have good people that demonstrate they can be done, but we really need to make them into regulation so that everybody does them. So like, yes, some people have low carbon houses, some people have low carbon vehicles, you know, the radical things take collective action. You want a radical solution that would make things change in a hurry? have the free ion travel. Then suddenly people will say, oh, okay, now I do want to use public transit rather than just thinking it doesn't cost that much to drive my vehicle. We think too much with each short cost and not the long ones. And of course, I totally agree with the other solutions. We should have, passive house for our social housing standards, as well as electrify. We have low carbon electricity. That's an easy one for us. Stop burning fossil fuel and electrify.
That's great.
I can add just a bit to the low hanging fruits. I think there is a big percentage, like somebody had presented, I think it was Amelia and her research from University of Waterloo, talking about the food waste. Is there opportunity? Well, I know there's opportunity, but maybe we should be thinking about policies around the food waste that's happening. And also that would bring into some of the social justice, because as we know, we have large homelessness rates within the Waterloo region, as well as across the province and the country, but also those people that are needing those foods that are being wasted. Like there should be nobody hungry in this country, in this world actually, but I mean, like those are something that we can think about in terms of policies and addressing the huge amount of food waste that happens.
Thanks, Fran.
I just add something really quickly, Caitlin.
Yeah,
it occurs to me that there are some sets of solutions that I would say are both low-hanging fruit and also transformative. And I immediately think about nature-based solutions, where we're quite a ways behind some places in the world who've really looked to regenerating ecosystems, not just sort of using ecosystems in like an extractive way, but regenerating nature, especially, and weaving it through urban spaces, but in a more effective way, so that we can, cool our cities and sink carbon and create recreational opportunities that enhance our physical and mental health, that enhance biodiversity, and sort of start to reinvigorate that reciprocal relationship with nature that we seem so divorced from. And that would have, incredibly transformative effects on climate, as well as deep social justice implications, I think.
Yeah, that's wonderful. This next question was directed to Stephanie. What would you suggest as a good next resource or read to further understand food strategies?
Yeah, I put a link in the chat. So the video, as I understand it, Kai and others from 50 by 30 have already put our individual videos online. And so in the link under my video, I have about 20 different links with some, UN reports and all kinds of international stuff, as well as like local organizations and national organizations that are worth connecting with. So hopefully people can find that separate video link and peruse through some of those, or get in touch with me by email, and I'm happy to share that.
That's great. Byron, I'm sorry, were you about to add something to the conversation? I didn't want to cut anyone off.
Well, it was really just a point about I'm gonna play the philosopher a little bit here and say that I do appreciate the question about low hanging fruit, but we should also be a little bit suspicious of the metaphor, because it suggests that we should only go for the stuff or only look primarily at the stuff that's easy to do, and that's fine if you do it and then go to the higher hanging fruit, but it shouldn't be used as an excuse for only undertaking the relatively unambitious things. So let's be just a little bit wary of the metaphor of low-hanging fruit.
Another question that was brought up in the chat is, what are your tips on how to organize your community?
I would like to chime in on this.
Yeah, please do.
Because like Indigenous ways of doing is all community-based, is family-oriented, right? And currently, within society, everything seems to be siloed, right? I mean, like, even if we look at the different sectors to do with, you know, well-being, for example, like a person's well-being, we can't just look at employment and education with that person. Like, there, everything has to be looked at holistically in order to really be effective and to help service individuals, right? So if we're talking about, you know, community, we have to consider every aspect of individuals and their lives. Food is a big, huge part of that. Nature is a big, huge part of that. But like, everything has to start to work together more. I think things need to be modeled after a holistic approach with everything. If that makes sense, you know, like, I'm just thinking, like, we have to stop all these silos, and we have to really look at holistic approaches or a holistic model when we're doing anything, you know, whether it's social justice, whether it's well-being, whether it's employment, housing, food, everything. It's all tied into one, really, if we really wrap our minds around that. And how do we bring those things together is, you know, we have to have a really good team, right? We have to have the offense, the defense, the coaches, the fans, right? I'm thinking of sports, but I mean, realistically, that's what makes a team, and that's what makes it effective, is everybody doing their part and doing their part effectively to the best of their ability. And, excuse me, not trying to be something or do something that they're really not good at, because then that it does not contribute to the team's efforts, right?
I don't know, does anyone else want to add anything, or should I bring up the next question?
I'd like to add in that
Okay.
I'm a huge fan of collective action, and collective action by organizations, not just individuals. So one of the things we've been studying is large sustainability partnerships in the local scale, and how you can get all your major employers, all your major actors at the organizational scale, collectively working towards a common vision and helping implement not just climate goals, but also social goals. And so one of my favorite stories in this is out of Barcelona, which has more than 1,000 partners, all working towards a common vision. So each of these organizations is built it into their own organizational strategy and initiatives. That's where I think we need to get to see that level of collective action, especially from our business sector. Because we have really strong commitment already from local government. Yes, it can go further, but there's already a motivation there. And we have really strong NGOs. It's our business community and some of the other actors now that collectively we could do a lot more.
The next question we have is, we've seen significant decreases in greenhouse gas emissions during the pandemic. Are the speakers optimistic that we can maintain that? Are there other learnings from the past year?
I can jump in. So one of the exciting upturns from the pandemic has been the interest in local food and growing your own food. And so it was incredible to hear about, you know, seed suppliers selling out last spring. And I know both the cities of Kitchener and Waterloo had some small efforts to give out some little kits for people with a few, I don't know, tomato and other beans and things, seeds to start growing if they didn't have any experience doing that already. And so I'm really optimistic that has whet people's appetites, and people will continue to take an interest in growing some of their own food. I hope that will also have ripple out into other aspects, such as what I mentioned about food, you know, food preserving, which, as I said, is an important aspect of food, you know, self-reliance, self-provisioning, and emergency preparedness. But I think it can go so much further too. One of the pieces I couldn't mention in my video for lack of time, is the work of Grand River Food Forestry with Nicola Thomas, based in Kitchener. And she has worked in several parks and other areas around the region to establish food forests where, you know, there are raspberry and blueberry and currants and nut trees and other kinds of plants that are available and free for the taking. So I think that's, you know, I'm optimistic that those elements, I guess, of food relocalization at a individual level and hopefully at a community level can be taking place. I'm also excited to hear in the last 6 months about this Indigenous Food Sovereignty Collective of Waterloo Region that has emerged, doing both community garden work as well as coordinating food donations that are being distributed to households in need across the community. And again, it's just a phenomenal, you know, mobilization of people who are concerned. I understand it's like 5 women who sort of started it and are coordinating that effort across the region. And they have plans in place to sort of increase their, there's a yard share program as well. I mean, that ties into this economies of care and a sharing economy where people who have space in their backyard and are not using it are donating it to have volunteers come and grow food that can be donated to community members. So those are just a few examples that I'll share.
Can I jump in with, oh, there's 2 others too. Okay, I'll try and be really quick. Okay, I wanted to follow up in the comments. I replied to that question by just saying, I want us all, you know, I appreciate our zeal in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and addressing climate change in a real way. We need to be careful, you know, about how we frame the reductions that have happened over the last year, because this has been a really tragic time. And this is not how we want emissions reductions to go in the future. Quite clearly. However, what it does tell us is, you know, we think that global greenhouse gas emissions might have gone down by about 7 or 8% over the last year, which is actually the level, the scale, the pace of reductions that we do need to get to reach these targets that we're setting. So, but we want to do it totally differently, you know, in ways that are just and equitable and healthy and safe. So, so the level of ambition is being set, but we want to do it totally differently. And the other point that I would just make really quickly is that we saw, for instance, New York compared to Paris. You know, New York went into lockdown, Paris went into lockdown. In Paris, emissions just plummeted because most of the emissions from Paris were from transportation. You get out of your car, you stay at home, transportations go down, or emissions go down. In New York, they didn't plummet because most of the emissions are from buildings. We're still heating our buildings. If there's 2 people in an office building, you heat the whole thing. So, you know, that the emissions are baked into our cities in ways that are outside of the control of individuals in many ways. So this comes back to the issue of, I think, you know, collective decision-making on climate change, not just individual action.
Byron, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I have no idea where greenhouse gases will go once the pandemic is done. One of the things that I think has been positive, if I can use that word, about the whole experience is that it's forced us to talk about the nature of, and value of work in a way that we weren't doing before. And in particular, to kind of center the concept and think seriously about the concept of what constitutes an essential worker. And I think we've come to a sort of tacit understanding socially that an essential worker, at least in this context, is somebody who is acting for the betterment of the collective at a time of crisis. And I think that's a concept that can be really useful in the context of the climate crisis as we seek to find ways of kind of motivating this push to build back better, as Kai put it. That we should talk about the labor that's involved in remaking all of the infrastructure of our society in a way that accords with our climate goals as centering essential work. And we've started that conversation in a completely unintended way, right? But I think that we should continue it and apply it in this new context, quite beyond the pandemic.
Absolutely. Was there another person that wanted to contribute to this question? I know there was a few hands at one point. If not, we can move on to our final question for the night. The last question is, what lessons can we draw from other transformative moments in history that could be applied to what is required politically and societally today to reach 20 by 30? Yeah,
I don't mind starting that unless anybody wants to jump in first. In fact, I just wrote a book about this, so it's kind of in the forefront of my mind. So yeah, I wrote a book about previous collective crises from the Peloponnesian War between the Athenians and the Spartans, way back in ancient Greece, all the way up to the French Revolution, and showed that these were times of deep collective crises. When the fundamental values that organized society kind of fell apart and crumbled due to things like war and other kinds of catastrophes, revolution, occupation, and so on. And from each of these kind of events or happenings, I drew a lesson for our own crisis. And so they're there in the book. I don't want to turn this into a plug for the book, right? But I also don't want to spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes talking about it. So yes, I mean, the short answer is I think history is full of examples of deep collective crises that were overcome by people rejigging their values in fundamental ways and coming out the other side of it in better shape than they were before. So it's some reason I don't like to think of myself as an optimist per se about climate change, right? But it's some reason, at least for hope, political hope.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of piggyback a bit off what Byron said. We're in a time that we've never been in before. I mean, with the pandemic, but also with relationships with settler and Indigenous people. And we know that from the TRC. And so I think we're in some very unique times. And I say that because there's so much opportunity now to have all of those different players at the table, as everybody's been talking about this evening. But I mean that to add to the efforts that are happening now, people are starting to recognize, and as an Indigenous person, I am very grateful that our people are recognized again as human, and that there is value. People recognize the value in Indigenous ways of doing and knowing and seeing and being. And so I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Tuaitsean concept of the Mi'kmaq people from the East Coast, but it talks about, how do we move forward in reconciliation? How do we move forward in, humanity? Getting back to humanity, is we need those different perspectives, right? We need that Western perspective, and we also, in the other eye, we need that Indigenous perspective to say, how do we find balance in all of that? How do we, work together and move forward? And I think what that means to me is like, from a Western perspective, it's about corporation, it's about business, it's about, the economy and whatnot. From an Indigenous perspective, it's about climate, and it's about our relationship to the lands. And I think that's what I've been hearing all evening, is how do we work these two together? How do we bridge business and climate concerns and climate awareness and climate control? How do we bridge those two value systems, or those two different types of objectives? How do we bridge those together? So yeah, just kind of the same thing, is that looking at, we have a lot of opportunity right now, and I think we need to, leverage all of it. I'll leverage the corporation, leverage the concerns with the climate, as well as the social justice, right?
Stephanie?
Yeah, I mean, so with the question of sort of what are any historical parallels or historical times that we can learn from, I think there's 3 examples that come to mind for me. One, as Fran was just relating, I mean, if we think about colonialism in the Americas, and what that meant for food security of Indigenous peoples in Mesoamerica, about 80% of the diet, the grain, was amaranth, and under the Spanish colonialism, it was prohibited. it was seen as a threat. In North America, Turtle Island, stalks of corn of the Haudenosaunee people, sometimes they had 15 years of stocks of corn supply, and that was burned. You know, people who out in the prairies who relied on buffalo, and the buffalo were massacred, and yet people survived. Another historical period, you know, if we look at what happened in Cuba in the early 1990s, when the petroleum imports from the Soviet Union were cut off as the Eastern Bloc collapsed, and people had to develop a strategy, you know, on the fly, with government and communities to develop organic agriculture and community gardens and all sorts of things. And so it was a time of great innovation. And then finally, I mean, I think we need to think about this at sort of the individual and the community and the government level. In 2008 and 9, with the global financial crisis, many countries, think about Singapore, countries in East Asia, other countries around the world, suddenly became a whole lot more aware of the potential for of trade shocks, you know, as countries were like closing their borders and saying, no, we're not going to export our rice anymore because we need to keep it for our own populations. And so then other countries began to innovate and realize that perhaps they couldn't infinitely kind of rely on food imports. So those are the three events that come to mind for me that hint at the importance of food self-reliance.
Would anyone else like to add anything? Okay, on that note, if anyone has any final thoughts, we can share them now, but we can also, looking at the clock, we're a few minutes over, but I think the conversation has been really rich and powerful. So I just want to thank our speakers again from IC3 for participating live in this Q&A. And thank you again to Kai and Laura, MPP Laura May Lindo, Kelly Fran Davis, City of Kitchener Mayor Barry Verbanovich. So thank you again for participating, and David, of course, David Marscal. So thank you again for everyone being here and participating and engaging in the conversation. Be safe, be healthy, and have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good night.
See you again.
Everyone.